The most painful moment for an avoidant may not be the day you walk away. It may be the day they finally understand that you are not coming back forward. And that realization can arrive much later than you expect. At first, your absence may look like exactly what they wanted. There is no emotional pressure, no difficult conversations forward, no expectations, no one asking them to explain what they feel. The distance can feel peaceful. It can even feel like freedom forward. But there is a hidden psychological shift that can happen when temporary silence slowly becomes permanent. The person who was always there stops checking in forward. They stop trying to repair the connection. They stop waiting. They stop leaving the door open. And suddenly, the avoidant is no longer dealing with distance they can control forward. They're dealing with loss they cannot reverse. This is where the story becomes much more complicated than simply saying they pushed you away because they did not care forward. Avoidant attachment does not automatically mean a person has no feelings. In many cases, the deeper issue is how that person handles closeness, vulnerability, emotional dependence forward, and the discomfort that can come with being deeply known by someone else. A person can care about someone and still feel overwhelmed by intimacy forward. A person can miss someone and still create distance. A person can want connection while also feeling a powerful need to protect their independence forward. This contradiction is one of the least understood parts of avoidant behavior. From the outside, an avoidant may appear calm after a breakup or after pushing someone away forward. They may seem completely unaffected. They may return to their normal routine quickly. They may focus on work, friends, hobbies, or personal freedom forward. They may even convince themselves that leaving was the right decision. To the person on the other side, this can feel brutal forward. You may wonder how someone could share so much with you and then act as if none of it mattered. But emotional processing does not always happen at the same speed for everyone forward. Some people experience the emotional impact immediately. Others push uncomfortable feelings aside and continue functioning until something finally breaks through that emotional distance forward. That delay is important because when an avoidant first notices your absence, the reaction may not be heartbreak. It may be relief forward. This does not necessarily mean they are celebrating your loss. It can mean that the emotional tension connected to closeness has suddenly disappeared. If intimacy made them feel exposed forward, responsible, trapped, or emotionally overwhelmed, separation can temporarily reduce that pressure. Their nervous system may settle. Their mind may become quieter forward. They may feel more independent again. And because that feeling is real, they may believe they made the correct decision. But there is something they may not understand yet forward. Relief is not always the final emotional stage. Sometimes relief is simply the first layer covering a deeper reaction that has not been processed. As time passes, something changes forward. You remain silent. You do not chase. You do not send another emotional message. You do not ask for another explanation forward. You do not try to convince them that the relationship was worth saving. You simply continue living. This is where the avoidant may begin to notice something different forward. Your absence is no longer temporary. There is no familiar pattern waiting for them. No predictable message. No guarantee that you will eventually return forward. No certainty that they can reconnect whenever they feel ready. And that can create a completely different psychological experience forward. The person who once felt overwhelmed by closeness may suddenly become aware of the space created by your absence forward. The silence that once felt peaceful can begin to feel strangely permanent. This is one of the lesser known parts of the avoidant experience. Forward. The emotional meaning of separation can change over time. In the beginning, distance can restore a sense of control. Later, forward, the same distance can remove the very connection that provided emotional familiarity, comfort, and attachment. The mind can move from "I finally have space" to forward. Why are they not coming back? And eventually, for some people, the question becomes much harder. Did I lose them for good? Forward. That is the central question we are going to explore in this video. What actually happens inside an avoidant when they realize that the person they pushed away is truly gone? Forward. Not temporarily gone, not waiting, not secretly hoping for another chance, gone from their emotional reach. Forward. We will break down the psychological progression that can happen from the first feeling of relief to the later experience of uncertainty, delayed emotional processing, nostalgia, forward, and possible regret. We will also examine why an avoidant can miss someone without immediately reaching out, why emotional distance can sometimes make attachment more noticeable, forward, and why realizing that someone is gone does not automatically mean that person is suddenly ready for a healthy relationship, forward. That distinction matters because there is a dangerous myth surrounding avoidant relationships. People often believe that if an avoidant misses you enough, forward, they will eventually return and everything will become different. Real psychology is more complicated. Missing someone is an emotion. Changing a pattern is a process. Forward. Regret is not the same as emotional maturity. And wanting someone back is not the same as becoming capable of giving them the security they needed in the first place. Forward. There is another important piece that most people miss. Avoidant behavior is not simply about wanting to be alone. Forward. It can involve a complicated relationship with emotional dependence itself. Closeness may create a conflict between the desire for connection and the desire for autonomy. Forward. When the relationship becomes emotionally intense, the person may move away to reduce that internal tension. Once the distance becomes safe, attachment needs may become easier to notice. Forward. This creates a push and pull that can be confusing for everyone involved. They may want space when you are close. They may notice your absence when you finally give them that space. Forward. They may feel calmer when you stop pursuing them. Then they may begin wondering why your silence feels so different from before. Forward. And when they finally understand that you have moved forward without them, the emotional meaning of their earlier decision can change completely. Forward. But there is one thing you need to remember throughout this video. This is not about learning how to manipulate an avoidant into missing you. Forward. It is not about using silence as a strategy to force someone to return. And it is not about assuming that every person with avoidant traits will experience the same emotional journey. Forward. Human behavior is far more individual than that. Forward. This is about understanding the psychology behind a pattern that can look emotionally cold from the outside, while being much more complicated internally. Forward. Sometimes the person who seems least affected is simply the person who processes the emotional consequences later. Forward. Sometimes the silence you think means they forgot you is actually part of a much, much longer emotional process. And sometimes, by the time they fully understand what they lost, forward, you have already reached a place where their realization no longer controls your life. That is where the story becomes most powerful. Forward. Because the final stage is not really about whether the avoidant comes back. It is about what happens when they realize that you no longer need them to come back. Stay until the end. Forward. Because we are going to uncover the stages that can occur when temporary distance turns into permanent absence forward, and why the moment an avoidant realizes that you are truly gone can feel completely different from the moment they first pushed you away. Welcome to Avoidant Insights forward. If you want to understand the hidden psychology behind emotional distance, attachment, relationships, and the behaviors people often struggle to explain forward, subscribe to the channel and join us as we uncover what is really happening beneath the surface forward. There is a major psychological difference between someone being away and someone being truly gone. Temporary distance still leaves a door open. The other person may return forward. They may send a message. They may ask for another conversation. They may still be emotionally available forward. Permanent separation feels different because the expectation of return slowly disappears. For someone with strong avoidant tendencies, that difference can take time to register forward. When intimacy becomes emotionally overwhelming, an avoidant person may rely on what psychologists often describe as deactivating strategies forward. These are mental and emotional strategies that reduce awareness of attachment needs. Instead of focusing on how much they miss someone forward, they may focus on why the relationship was difficult. Instead of thinking about emotional closeness, they may focus on independence. Instead of confronting sadness forward, they may stay busy and convince themselves that distance is the better choice. This can make their reaction look strangely cold. Someone leaves, and the avoidant appears fine forward. There is no dramatic chase. There may be no emotional breakdown. There may not even be an immediate attempt to reconnect. From the outside forward, it can look like the relationship meant nothing. But emotional behavior is rarely that simple. One surprising feature of avoidant attachment is that emotional responses can be delayed forward. A person may function normally for days, weeks, or even longer, while pushing uncomfortable feelings outside their immediate attention forward. That does not mean every avoidant secretly suffers in silence. It means emotional expression and emotional experience are not always identical forward. A person can suppress an emotion without permanently eliminating it. The first stage may therefore feel like relief. Distance removes pressure. There is more personal space forward. There are fewer emotional demands. The mind can interpret this as safety. Then comes emotional suppression. Memories may appear, but they are pushed away. Questions may arise forward, but they are avoided. The person may tell themselves that moving on is easier. This is where the story can become difficult to read from the outside forward. Silence does not give you enough information to know exactly what someone feels. Then something can change. The silence continues. The other person does not return forward. The familiar pattern disappears. Curiosity can begin to replace certainty. Why have they stopped reaching out? Have they moved on? Are they seeing someone else forward? Did they finally stop caring? These questions can create uncertainty because the avoidant no longer has the same sense of emotional control. Eventually, forward, recognition of loss may begin to appear. The person is no longer simply enjoying distance. They are becoming aware of what that distance has removed. Familiar conversations are gone forward. Emotional familiarity is gone. The possibility of connection may no longer be guaranteed. This can open the door to regret, but regret is not inevitable. Some people reflect deeply forward. Others continue to suppress their emotions. Some may seek another relationship. Others may accept the separation and move forward. Attachment style does not control a person's choices like a script. Personality, history, emotional maturity, relationship quality, and personal circumstances all matter. Forward. That is why this is not a story about every avoidant person behaving in exactly the same way. Forward. It is about understanding the psychological pattern without turning it into a romantic fantasy or a villain story. The real question is not simply whether an avoidant misses someone. Forward. The deeper question is what happens when the emotional defense that once made distance feel safe can no longer hide the reality that the relationship has changed forever. Forward. And that is where the first real shift begins. Forward. The first reaction may be the one that hurts the most to witness. You leave, and instead of panic, the avoidant person may look calm. Instead of chasing you forward, they may become even more distant. Instead of showing heartbreak, they may seem lighter, more focused, and almost relieved. Forward. This can create one of the most painful questions after an avoidant relationship ends. How can someone seem so unaffected by losing a person they once allowed into their life? Forward. The answer begins with the way some people respond to emotional pressure. When closeness starts to feel overwhelming, distance can reduce that pressure almost immediately. Forward. A relationship can involve expectations, emotional conversations, vulnerability, conflict, reassurance, and the need to respond to another person's feelings. Forward. For someone with strong avoidant tendencies, these experiences can activate a strong desire for autonomy. They may feel that they are losing control over their personal space. Forward. They may feel responsible for emotions they do not know how to handle. They may begin to experience closeness as pressure rather than comfort. Forward. When the relationship suddenly becomes distant, that pressure disappears. The nervous system can settle. The mind can become quieter. And that sense of relief can feel very real. Forward. This is where deactivation becomes important. In attachment psychology, forward, deactivating strategies refer to ways people reduce awareness of attachment needs when closeness feels uncomfortable or threatening. Forward. These strategies can happen outside conscious awareness. The person may not sit down and decide to stop caring. Instead, forward, their attention may naturally shift toward thoughts that make emotional distance easier to tolerate. They may start focusing on the flaws in the relationship. Forward. Small problems can suddenly seem much larger. Things that once felt manageable may become evidence that the relationship was never right. Forward. The mind may begin collecting reasons to justify the separation. This does not mean every complaint was invented. Many relationships genuinely have problems. Forward. The important detail is how attention can change when emotional closeness becomes uncomfortable. Positive memories may receive less attention, forward, while negative memories become easier to access. The person may think about arguments, incompatibilities, personal differences, or moments when they felt restricted. Forward. Those thoughts can provide emotional protection because they make separation feel logical. Another strategy is minimizing emotional needs. Forward. The avoidant person may tell themselves that they never needed the relationship that much. They may emphasize independence. They may become highly focused on work, hobbies, friends, forward, routines, or personal goals. These activities are not automatically unhealthy. Independence is valuable. Forward. The issue appears when independence becomes a way to avoid acknowledging emotional needs altogether. A person can genuinely enjoy solitude while also having attachment needs. Forward. Those two things can exist at the same time. Yet, during the early stage of separation, the independent side may become much louder. This can produce a strange emotional illusion. Forward. The avoidant may feel better because the emotional pressure is gone, and that temporary improvement can reinforce the belief that leaving was the correct decision. They may think, forward, I feel calmer now. Then the mind can turn that feeling into a larger conclusion. This relationship must have been the problem. Sometimes that conclusion is accurate. Forward. Sometimes it is only part of the story. This is why the early reaction can be so confusing for the person who was left. Forward. You may have spent days or months trying to understand what went wrong. You may have expected some sign that your absence mattered. Instead, you see silence. Forward. You see normal routines continuing. You see someone who appears completely fine. It can feel as if the relationship had no emotional weight at all. Forward. But visible calm is not a reliable measurement of internal attachment. Some people express distress openly. Others manage distress through distraction, suppression, emotional distancing, forward, or increased independence. A quiet reaction does not prove that someone feels nothing. At the same time, forward, it would be a mistake to assume that every calm avoidant person is secretly devastated. Psychology does not work that neatly. The behavior only tells us what is visible. Forward. It does not provide a direct window into someone's private emotional experience. There is also a lesser-known psychological twist here. Forward. Relief can sometimes make a person less likely to process loss immediately. If separation removes emotional discomfort, forward, there may be little immediate pressure to examine the deeper meaning of the relationship. The person feels better, so they keep moving. They may believe the difficult part is over. Forward. They may not realize that another emotional stage can emerge later, when the absence stops feeling temporary. At first, your silence may feel like space. Space feels safe. Forward. Space feels controllable. Space allows the avoidant person to return to familiar patterns of independence. But permanent silence is different. When there is no message, forward, no attempt to reconnect, and no sign that you are waiting, the psychological meaning of that silence begins to change. So, the person is no longer simply enjoying distance. Forward. They may slowly begin to notice that the person they expected to remain emotionally available is actually moving beyond their reach. Forward. And that is the point where relief can begin to turn into something far less comfortable. Forward. Something changes when silence stops looking temporary. In the beginning, an avoidant person may assume that distance is simply part of the cycle. Forward. There may still be an expectation that you will eventually reach out, ask how they are, explain your feelings, or try one more time to repair the connection. Forward. Even if they never say this out loud, familiar relationship patterns can create expectations about what will happen next. Then one day, that pattern stops. There is no message. Forward. No emotional conversation, no attempt to reconnect, no sign that you are waiting for them to change their mind. At first, this may go unnoticed. Forward. Then the absence becomes harder to ignore. This is where the psychological meaning of silence begins to change. Silence is no longer just space. It becomes information. Forward. The avoidant person may start noticing that the person who once pursued connection is no longer doing so. Forward. That can create uncertainty because the old pattern provided a form of predictability. They knew what happened after distance. They knew there might be another message. Forward. They knew the other person still cared. They knew the emotional door was probably still open. Once that certainty disappears, the situation becomes much less controllable. Forward. This does not mean the avoidant suddenly becomes emotionally secure or immediately wants the relationship back. It means that an expected pattern has been interrupted. Forward. Human beings often respond strongly to disrupted expectations. When something usually happens and then suddenly stops, the mind notices the difference. Forward. This is especially important in relationships because attachment involves expectations about availability, responsiveness, and emotional connection. When those expectations change, forward, uncertainty can become emotionally powerful. The avoidant, they may begin asking questions they never needed to ask before. Why are they not reaching out? Did they finally stop caring? Forward. Have they actually moved on? Did I push too far? Are they no longer emotionally available to me? Forward. These questions can appear even when the person still does not want to admit that they miss the relationship. Curiosity can arrive before vulnerability. Forward. Uncertainty can arrive before regret. The mind may first try to solve the mystery rather than confront the emotion underneath it. There is another subtle shift that can happen here. Forward. When someone is always available, their presence can become psychologically predictable. Predictability can make a person feel less urgent. Their value may be taken for granted. Forward. Not necessarily because they are not valued, but because their availability is assumed. When that availability disappears, the mind has to update its expectations. Forward. The person who was always there is no longer there. The relationship that could once be revisited now exists only in memory. This can make ordinary memories feel different. Forward. A message that once seemed routine may suddenly seem important. A familiar conversation may become something the person remembers with surprising detail. Forward. A small habit may become noticeable only after it is gone. This is one reason permanent absence can have a stronger psychological effect than temporary distance. Forward. Temporary distance still contains possibility. Permanent absence introduces finality. If someone leaves for a week, there is an expectation that the situation can change. Forward. If someone leaves and continues living without you, the mind eventually has to consider a different reality. They may have built new routines. They may have changed emotionally. Forward. They may no longer be waiting. The avoidant person can no longer assume that the old connection remains available whenever they decide to return. Forward. That loss of predictable access can be uncomfortable. It may create a strange form of emotional tension. Forward. The person who once wanted distance may now be thinking about the person who created that distance. Yet even here, behavior can remain quiet. An avoidant person may not call. Forward. They may not send a dramatic message. They may continue appearing normal. This is important because uncertainty does not always produce immediate action. Forward. For someone who relies on emotional distance, uncertainty can actually increase withdrawal. They may feel something internally, but still avoid exposing themselves to rejection. Forward. Vulnerability or emotional risk. They may check indirectly. They may wonder about your life. They may think about whether you have moved on. Forward. But none of this guarantees that they will return. The emotional process and the outward behavior can move in completely different directions. This is why silence can be so misleading. Forward. From your side, silence may look like indifference. From their side, silence may create questions they are not ready to voice. Forward. Neither interpretation can be confirmed simply by looking at the absence of a message. What matters is the psychological shift created by the disappearance of the old pattern. Before, forward, they could assume you would return. Now they cannot. Before, your attention was predictable. Now it is uncertain. Before, the emotional door seemed open. Forward. Now they may realize that the door may actually be closing, And when that possibility becomes real, your absence can become psychologically louder than your presence ever was. Forward. The silence no longer says, they are giving me space. It begins to ask something much more uncomfortable. What if they are actually moving on without me? Forward. And once that question enters the mind, the emotional meaning of the separation can begin to change again. Forward. The strange part about losing someone is that the emotional impact does not always arrive at the moment the relationship ends. For some people, the mind processes loss immediately. Forward. The sadness is obvious. The memories arrive quickly. The absence feels painful from the beginning. But for someone with strong avoidant tendencies, forward, emotional may take a different path. Instead of confronting the loss immediately, they may create psychological distance from it. They may stay busy. Forward. They may focus on practical matters. They may tell themselves that the relationship was too difficult. They may concentrate on the freedom they have regained. In the short term, forward, these responses can make separation feel easier. But emotional avoidance and emotional resolution are not always the same thing. Forward. A feeling that is pushed aside does not necessarily disappear. Sometimes it simply waits for a quieter moment. This is where delayed realization can become powerful. At first, forward, the avoidant may notice the absence in very practical ways. There's no message waiting on the phone. There's no familiar conversation. There's no person asking about their day. Forward. There's no one expecting them to explain their mood. Those changes may seem small. Then ordinary moments begin carrying emotional weight. A song can trigger a memory. Forward. A familiar place can bring back a conversation. A routine can suddenly remind them of the person who used to be part of it. Forward. Even a simple phrase can sound different because someone who used to say it is no longer there. This is one of the lesser known effects of relationship loss. Forward. The brain stores emotional experiences through many small associations. A person is not remembered only through major romantic moments. They can become connected to routines, sounds, forward, places, jokes, habits, and tiny details that once seemed meaningless. When the relationship is active, those details are simply part of daily life. After the person is gone, forward, they can become reminders of what has been lost. The avoidant may slowly begin noticing something they did not fully appreciate before. Forward. The relationship may have provided emotional safety. Not perfect safety, not constant comfort, but a familiar place where they could be known by another person. Forward. There may have been someone who noticed when they were quiet, someone who remembered small details, someone who offered consistent attention. Forward. Someone who knew their habits without needing an explanation. When that consistency disappears, its value can become much clearer. Forward. This does not mean the relationship was healthy in every way. It does not mean the avoidant suddenly understands everything they did wrong. Forward. It simply means absence can reveal functions that were easy to overlook while the relationship was still available. Forward. A person may miss the routines before they admit that they miss the person. They may miss the conversations before they admit that they miss the emotional connection. Forward. They may notice the silence before they understand why the silence feels uncomfortable. Gradually, the mind can move from remembering moments to recognizing meaning. Forward. They may remember a time when they felt accepted. They may remember a moment when they were vulnerable and the other person stayed. Forward. They may remember the way someone made ordinary days feel familiar. They may begin comparing new interactions with the emotional familiarity they once had. This can create nostalgia forward. But nostalgia is complicated. It often highlights meaningful memories while pushing difficult memories into the background forward. That is why missing someone does not automatically mean the relationship should be restored forward. A person can miss the comfort of a connection while still being unable to handle the vulnerability required to maintain it forward. They can regret losing someone and still repeat the same distancing pattern if the relationship begins again. This distinction is critical. Missing your presence is an emotion forward. Being ready for a healthy relationship is a skill. Those are not the same thing. An avoidant person may eventually realize that the person they pushed away had qualities that were rare forward. Patience, consistency, emotional warmth, understanding, loyalty, a willingness to stay through difficult conversations forward. But recognizing those qualities after the relationship ends does not automatically create the ability to receive them. That requires self-awareness and emotional growth forward. It requires learning to tolerate closeness without treating it as a threat. It requires taking responsibility instead of relying on distance whenever emotions become uncomfortable forward. And not every avoidant person reaches that point. Some may never deeply reflect on the loss. Some may move forward without significant regret. Others may feel sadness but keep it buried forward. Attachment style does not guarantee a particular ending. Human behavior is shaped by many factors, including personality, history, relationship quality, emotional maturity forward, and personal choices. The important psychological shift is that once the emotional pressure of the relationship is gone forward, the avoidant may finally have enough distance to notice what the relationship actually provided. The closeness that once felt demanding may now be remembered as comforting forward. The attention that once felt overwhelming may now feel absent. The person they once wanted space from may become the person they realize they cannot simply replace forward. And as those memories become more emotionally vivid, a deeper question can begin forming beneath the surface. If the distance they wanted has finally become permanent forward, why does that freedom suddenly feel so different from what they expected forward? This is where the psychology becomes deeply complicated, because an avoidant person can want distance and still miss the person they created distance from forward. Those two feelings may sound impossible to hold at the same time, but human attachment is not built around simple choices. A person can value independence and still crave connection forward. They can feel safer alone and still feel lonely. They can become uncomfortable with emotional closeness and still feel a powerful sense of loss when that closeness disappears forward. This internal conflict is one of the reasons avoidant behavior can look so confusing from the outside. One moment, they may seem desperate for space. Later, forward, that same space may begin to feel strangely empty. The distance that once reduced pressure can eventually remove something they valued without fully realizing it. In avoidant attachment forward, defensive strategies can exist alongside genuine attachment needs. When closeness becomes uncomfortable, the defensive side may become louder. The person may focus on independence forward. They may reduce emotional communication. They may convince themselves that needing someone is a weakness. They may create emotional distance because distance feels easier to control forward. But underneath those defenses, normal human attachment needs can still exist. People generally want to feel connected, understood, valued, and emotionally significant to someone forward. Avoidant tendencies do not erase those needs. They can make those needs harder to acknowledge and express forward. This creates an internal push and pull that can be difficult even for the avoidant person to understand. One part of them may think, I needed space. Another part may quietly ask, forward, then why does your absence hurt? They may remember how trapped they felt during moments of intense closeness, forward. Then they may remember how safe it felt to have someone who knew them deeply. They may tell themselves, I wanted freedom. Yet another thought may appear underneath it, forward. Why does it feel so empty now? This conflict can become even stronger when the other person starts moving forward, forward. The avoidant may have expected the connection to remain available in some form. They may have assumed that the other person would still care, forward. They may have believed that distance would create room without completely destroying the bond. But when they discover that the other person has genuinely moved on, forward, a new emotion can appear. They may feel replaced. Not necessarily because they wanted a relationship at that exact moment, forward, but because the emotional position they once occupied no longer belongs to them. Someone else may now receive the attention they once received, forward. Someone else may know the person in ways they once knew them. Someone else may become part of routines that once included them. This can activate a painful contradiction, forward. They wanted freedom from emotional pressure, but now they are facing the emotional consequences of that freedom. They wanted distance, forward, but the distance has created a loss they cannot easily reverse. This is also why inconsistent behavior can appear, forward. A person experiencing this conflict may move toward connection and then pull away again, forward. They may feel curious about the other person, but become uncomfortable when contact becomes emotionally serious. They may send a small signal and then disappear, forward. They may think about reconnecting, but hesitate when vulnerability becomes necessary. From the outside, this can look manipulative or confusing. Sometimes it can be, forward. But sometimes it reflects a genuine internal conflict that the person has never learned to manage in a healthier way. Understanding the conflict does not excuse harmful behavior, forward. It simply explains why emotional feelings do not always produce consistent actions. There is another important distinction. Missing someone is not the same as being ready for intimacy, forward. Longing can be triggered by loneliness, nostalgia, familiarity, or the loss of emotional comfort. Healthy vulnerability requires something deeper. It requires openness, forward. It requires communication. It requires tolerating discomfort without immediately escaping. It requires the ability to stay emotionally present when another person's needs become visible, forward. An avoidant person can miss you intensely and still struggle to provide those things, forward. They can think about you every day and still feel frightened by the closeness required to rebuild the relationship, forward. They can regret losing you and still repeat the same pattern if you return. This is why emotional longing should never be confused with transformation, forward. The most surprising part is that the person may not even recognize the conflict clearly. They may simply feel restless. They may feel distracted, forward. They may become more curious about your life. They may replay old conversations. They may suddenly notice how quiet their world feels, forward. They may wonder whether they made the right decision. But beneath those thoughts can be a deeper struggle between attachment and protection. The attachment system says, forward, this person mattered. The defensive system says, distance keeps me safe. Both can operate at the same time. And when the person they pushed away stops waiting, forward, that conflict can become even harder to ignore. Because now there is no easy way to keep both options open. The distance they wanted has become real. Forward. The person they miss may no longer be available. And the emotional question becomes much more difficult than simply asking whether they still care. Forward. It becomes a question of whether they can face the vulnerability they once escaped from. Forward. Once an avoidant person realizes that you have genuinely moved on, there is no single reaction that follows. This is where many people make a mistake. They expect one predictable ending. Forward. They expect the avoidant to suddenly return, apologize, confess their feelings, and finally become emotionally available. Real relationships rarely follow such a clean pattern. Forward. The realization can lead in several different directions, depending on the person's emotional maturity, self-awareness, relationship history, and ability to face uncomfortable feelings. Forward. For some, the first response is deeper avoidance. The realization may hurt, but instead of processing that pain, they push it down again. They may become even more focused on work. Forward. Routines, social activities, or personal independence. They may tell themselves that the relationship was never right. Forward. They may avoid checking on you because seeing you move forward would force them to face feelings they would rather not experience. Forward. This can look like complete indifference from the outside. But silence still cannot tell us exactly what is happening internally. Suppression can hide emotion, forward, but it does not necessarily resolve it. Second path is curiosity. The avoidant may begin wondering whether the connection is still available. Forward. They may become interested in your life again. They may look for indirect signs that you still care. They may send a small message, react to something, forward, or create a low-risk opportunity for contact. These behaviors can feel meaningful because they appear after a long period of distance. But curiosity is not commitment. Forward. Testing whether the door is still open is not the same as being ready to walk through it. Forward. Sometimes a person wants reassurance that they still matter without being prepared to offer the emotional security that the relationship requires. Forward. This is why indirect contact can create so much confusion. A small signal may awaken hope, while the underlying pattern remains unchanged. Forward. The third path is much harder and far more valuable. It is genuine self-reflection. The person begins looking honestly at their own behavior. Forward. Instead of blaming the relationship for every uncomfortable feeling, they begin asking deeper questions. Why did closeness feel threatening? Forward. Why did they pull away when things became emotionally serious? Why did they minimize their partner's needs? Forward. Why did they wait until the relationship was gone before recognizing its value? This kind of reflection can lead to real growth, but it requires more than missing someone. Forward. It requires accountability. It requires recognizing that emotional defenses may have protected them from discomfort while also damaging something important. Forward. It may involve learning how to communicate, tolerate vulnerability, and remain present during difficult emotional moments. That process can take time. Forward. It cannot be proven by one emotional message or one sudden return. Then there is a fourth path, acceptance. Forward. The person may eventually recognize that the relationship has ended and allow the loss to become part of their history. They may feel sadness. They may experience regret. Forward. They may remember the person with warmth. But they may also understand that not every meaningful connection is meant to be restored. Forward. Acceptance does not mean the relationship meant nothing. It means the person stops fighting reality. Forward. This distinction matters because people often confuse four completely different experiences. Missing you is one thing, Wanting access to you is another. Feeling regret is another. Forward. Being capable of a secure relationship is something else entirely. Someone can miss your presence without being ready to love you differently. Forward. Someone can want to know whether you still care without wanting a committed relationship. Forward. Someone can regret losing you while still being unable to change the behavior that caused the loss. Forward. And someone can genuinely love you while still lacking the emotional skills needed to build a stable relationship. Forward. That is why a return should never be treated as automatic proof of transformation. The real evidence is what happens after the return. Can they communicate clearly? Forward. Can they take responsibility? Can they tolerate closeness without suddenly creating distance? Can they respect boundaries? Forward. Can they remain consistent when the relationship becomes emotionally demanding? Those behaviors reveal much more than a message saying they miss you. Forward. And this is where the focus needs to shift away from the avoidant and back toward the person who was left. Forward. Waiting for someone else's realization can quietly keep you attached to a relationship that no longer exists. You can spend months wondering whether they regret leaving. Forward. You can analyze every silence. You can search for hidden meanings in small signs. But your healing cannot depend on someone else finally understanding your value. Forward. Their realization belongs to them. Your healing belongs to you. If they grow, that is their journey. If they regret their choices, that is their emotional work. If they return, forward, you still have the right to decide whether their presence belongs in your life. Because the most powerful moment is not necessarily when they finally realize that they lost you. Forward. It is when you realize that their realization no longer determines your worth, your peace, or the direction of your life. Forward. And that is the point where the entire meaning of the relationship begins to change. Forward. Sometimes the person who pushed you away does not understand your absence at the same speed that you experience it. For you, the loss may have been immediate. You felt the silence. Forward. You felt the unanswered questions. You felt the weight of being rejected or emotionally shut out. But for an avoidant person, the emotional process can unfold differently. Forward. Distance may first feel like relief. The pressure disappears. The need to explain feelings disappears. Independence returns. For a while, that can make the separation feel easier. Forward. Then the silence continues, and slowly, silence can become uncertainty. The person who once seemed available is no longer reaching out. The familiar pattern has changed. Forward. There is no guarantee that you will return. There is no certainty that the emotional door is still open. That is when the meaning of your absence can begin to change. Forward. Permanent absence can create delayed recognition. Memories can become more meaningful. Familiar routines can suddenly feel empty. Forward. Moments of emotional safety may be remembered differently. The person may begin recognizing qualities they once took for granted. But even then, an internal conflict can remain. Forward. One part may still want independence. Another part may feel loneliness, nostalgia, or regret. They may miss you and still struggle with vulnerability. Forward. They may want connection and still fear the closeness required to maintain it. That is why one truth matters more than everything else in this entire conversation. Forward. Someone realizing your value is not the same as someone becoming capable of loving you securely. A person can miss you without changing. Forward. They can regret losing you without understanding why they pushed you away. They can return without becoming emotionally available. Forward. And they can feel deeply for you while still repeating the same patterns, that caused the relationship to break. Avoidant attachment can help explain behavior. Forward. It does not excuse hurting someone. It does not excuse emotional neglect. It does not remove the need for communication, accountability, respect, and emotional responsibility. Forward. So if they eventually realize that you are truly gone, let that realization belong to them. You do not need to stand at the door waiting for someone to understand what they lost. Forward. You do not need to prove your value through silence. You do not need their regret to confirm that you mattered. Forward. Sometimes the most powerful ending is not the moment they finally miss you. It is the moment you stop needing them to. Forward. Because when you begin building a life that no longer depends on their attention, their return, or their realization, something changes. Forward. You are no longer waiting for them to close the emotional distance. You have already crossed it yourself. And perhaps that is the final twist. Forward. They may one day realize that the person they thought would always be there has genuinely moved forward. But by then, you may have discovered something far more important. Forward. You were never meant to spend your life waiting for someone else to realize your worth. If this video gave you a deeper understanding of avoidant psychology, forward. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Avoidant Insights. There is much more to discover about attachment, emotional distance, and the hidden patterns that shape relationships. Forward. Because sometimes the door does not become meaningful when someone finally notices that it is closing. It becomes meaningful when you realize you no longer need to keep it open.